So welcome everybody. It's week 6 of Great Wall Group online leaders course, and great pleasure today to welcome Beth as our speaker, talking about General Sir Julian Byng, which I think is going to be very interesting indeed. And let's do a quick introduction. I think surely everyone knows Beth as one of the co-founders of this great war group of ours, and also trustee. As well as that, she's a battlefield tour guide and also has a number of projects that she's undertaking at the moment, including the 14th Division project, also research on 46th North Midland Division, and also researching men from her hometown killed during the First World War. But today we've got the pleasure of Beth talking to us about General Julian Byng. So Beth, if you're happy to share your screen, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you for introducing me so succinctly. First things first, I just want to say, everyone, welcome. I can't quite believe it's already week 6 of this course. It seems to have absolutely flown by, and we've had some absolutely fantastic and really, really interesting different characters over the last few weeks. I have been tasked with talking to you today about General Sir Julian Byng. Now, he has quite an interesting life. I'm just going to jump straight in. He is born in 1862, and would you believe, the 7th son and 13th youngest child of George Byng. His oldest siblings are well into their 20s. He's actually the youngest child of a second marriage as well. So there's quite a big age gap between some of him and some of his other siblings. And obviously, yes, his father may be second Earl of Strafford, but 13 children are not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. So his father does run a relatively frugal household. He does send all of his children off to various private schools, Eton and so on, but it's very much a hand-me-down family. Byng himself, Julian, generally found himself having ill-fitting shoes and boots because he would just get the hand-me-downs, which actually led to him having feet problems later on in life because he never had the right fitting equipment. But because of that start in life, right up until the age of 12 when he goes off to Eton, he knows how to look after himself. He is self-sufficient, he will get involved, and he'll just get on with things. He doesn't make a fuss. He's used to being that youngest child in a massive family, which I can imagine if you've got 13 children, plus the older ones, other halves in their other families, it's easy to get lost in a big family. And I'm sure Julian did at points. And he's just got on with things. He's got on with life. As I said, he moves up to Eton in 1874, and he is nicknamed Bungo. This is to differentiate him with his 2 other brothers in age, next in age to him, who are also at Eton, who are Bingo and Bango. I can imagine the housemasters at Eton, when he arrives there in 1874, going, "What, another one? There is another one of these Byng children." So I can imagine what they thought when he finally rolled around and did turn out to be the last one. Now, he describes himself, in his own words, as the worst scug in school, which the scug is a sort of an Eton term for someone who's not sort of academically at the top, not maybe sporting at the top. They're just sort of indistinguishable maybe from the wider crowd, and he described himself as the worst of that. You really can see that with his devil-may-care attitude to academia, where he once traded a Latin book for a pair of ferrets and a pineapple, which does sound like the punchline to some sort of bad joke. I don't know what, I haven't thought of one yet, but it does sound like a punchline of some description. And any punishments that did come from home, his father, not sending him his allowances and so on, it didn't deter him. He just got on with life. But he did sort of need to end up somewhere after Eton. Eton isn't the be all and end all. He needs to go somewhere from that point on. And he is drawn into sort of a military life, like some of his brothers have been. One's a vicar, one works as sort of a politician, but most of them have gone into the military. But he won't get the same path into the military that his brothers have. He's got to have a bit of luck on his side, really. He's not going to be able to go in the traditional route of being an officer, where they have the sort of the yearly allowance, which helps them live as an officer because they're not paid. His father can't afford for him to do that. So what he does is something completely different. He goes into the 2nd Middlesex Militia, because as an officer, as a junior officer, second lieutenant, he doesn't need an allowance to look after himself. He doesn't need to have this set amount of money. So he goes into this militia 2 weeks shy of his 17th birthday, and he takes this very seriously. He attends all of the training camps. He is very well liked by other officers and the men as well. He has found his niche. He's found where he wants to be, and he is thriving. 1881, just at the age of 18, he's promoted to lieutenant, and this is his environment. He's an excellent horseman. He's a better than average shot. I mean, even his social life, he enjoys a bit of fishing, polo, cricket. He plays for the village cricket team. He likes a bit of theatre and amateur dramatics. He's very comfortable and quite well-rounded, but is looking for something more. Now, he's very, very lucky. He has luck on his side in 1882. His father is having dinner with the Prince of Wales, who is a friend, family friend, and is inquiring after all of the Byng children, and they come on to Julian. And the Prince of Wales offers Julian's father, George, a commission for Julian, says he must come and join my regiment, the 10th Royal Hussars, an extremely prolific regiment, extremely well known. And George is in a bit of a position because he can't turn down this offer from the Prince of Wales, but he cannot afford for Julian to go into this regiment. He could afford to give Julian, as an officer, £200 a year. The minimum expected amount, so not even what most officers were living off, the minimum amount that was expected was £600 a year. So he's already at a disadvantage. As I said, he can't turn this offer down. George accepts on behalf of Julian, and Julian's absolutely delighted. When he arrives, he gets involved, and he's put to the test: riding, drill, shooting, fencing. He is tested as to what his skills are and passes with flying colours, essentially. Because of that disparaging income, he is, again, this is the theme that will recur throughout his life and throughout this presentation. He learns to do things for himself. He is sufficient. He quite quickly knows that he's lived around horses. He's worked around horses. He has a skill when it comes to horses. What he did was he would purchase ponies, train them to play polo, and then sell them on at profit, thus making himself sort of a little bit of a businessman as well, quite shrewd with some of the business deals he was doing. Again, later on, you'll hear about another story about business. But he is fully comfortable adapting and doing what he needs to do to get by. Eventually, he goes out and does serve abroad with the regiment. He goes to India, the Sudan, all these really exotic places, and then ends up back in Kent. Can't be helped, unfortunately. But whilst he's there, he's appointed the adjutant of the regiment, and he actually is doing quite well. He realises, whilst the adjutant, that he thinks he is suspicious that Smithfield Market is giving him, his regiment, and therefore his soldiers, unsatisfactory meat of not very good quality. So he goes to the market, spends many days there, learns the trade, and then realises that his suspicions were correct, they're confirmed, and he ends up changing the contract, getting a better price, better meat all round. So again, he's self-sufficient. He's got this sort of mind where he can make things work in the way that he needs them to. He goes off to staff college, we all know about that, learning sort of the admin side of what senior officers are undertaking in the army. He's there alongside Rawlinson, Snow, Wilson, all men who he's going to serve with during the First World War. A bit of personal context: he meets his wife in 1898. Before he goes off to the Boer War, they exchange many letters whilst he's there. But this is where really we start to see sort of Byng, as we know in the First World War, come to light in South Africa during the Boer War. He's placed in charge as Lieutenant Colonel of the South African Light Horse. Now, when I was looking into this group seems to be a little bit of a mishmash of people. There's South Africans, there's other colonials, there's British soldiers. There's even randomly a group of Texans who have brought over some mules for the war and just thought, hang on, we're going to stay. We quite like the idea of staying and joining in the fun for a little bit. So it's a mix of people. And he very quickly realizes that these are not a group of people he's going to be able to train. He's not going to be able to make them into another battalion of the Royal Hussars. He has to use what he's got. He recognizes where their strengths are, and he develops those strengths to make them the best fighting soldier they can be. In addition to that, he's working them hard because they're not soldiers. He's very much keen on undergoing intensive training. He serves in the front lines with them as well. He gets right into it. He's quite legendary for his coolness and collection in battle. He is devoted to his men and them the other way as well. On top of it being technically sort of a cavalry unit, as we say, light horse, he has the emphasis on light here. He is very much focused on the fact that whilst they will undertake traditional cavalry roles, reconnaissance and so on, their fighting will be done with rifles and it will be done on foot. So mobile cavalry, mounted infantry, whatever term you prefer. He does extremely well. In South Africa, he's mentioned in dispatches 5 times. He gets appointed to the Royal Victorian Order. He eventually gets married to Evelyn in 1902. This sort of period of time, that sort of 3 years of the war, professionally and personally, is quite good for Byng. When him and Evelyn get married and they're on their honeymoon in Paris, Kitchener, who is in the South Africa at the time, also fighting in the Boer War, writes to Evelyn, not to Julian, to Evelyn, saying, when's your honeymoon over? When's Julian coming back? I can't do without him. So he's very clearly from these sort of 1900 years. So he's in his mid-30s. He is making waves. People are recognizing him and what he is doing. He's sent back to India for a little while, and during his time in India, there are murmurings about senior command, which eventually get on to the next point of cavalry commander. But during that time, he suffers personally. They find his wife has multiple miscarriages and they find out they're not going to be able to have children of their own. But he also has an accident where he breaks his elbow so badly that they think he's going to have to leave the army, and he's distraught. He's absolutely devastated. An extended period of time back in England, undergoing treatment, does successfully repair the break, and he is able to go back into his job. And this is then when he starts to see his promotion sort of rising. We start to see the track of where he is going. He's placed in command of the new cavalry school at Netheravon, and there is nothing there. He has got to build this from the ground up, which, as we know, he likes doing. He is sufficient. He gets involved. Someone at the time, a man called Colonel John Vaughan, wrote, he had the task of trying to make bricks without straw, an operation at which, however, he was strangely successful. So as again, he is quite happy to get stuck in, get involved. It doesn't matter that he didn't have the facilities that he maybe needed, didn't matter if he didn't have necessarily all the supplies. He would find a way to make it work, and he did. This is a brief posting, though. He is eventually, again, realised what a brilliant soldier he is, and he's promoted again. He's promoted to Brigadier General and in charge of the 2nd Cavalry Brigade for a year before moving to the 1st Cavalry Brigade. At the time, he's in direct conflict, actually, with John French regarding cavalry tactics. Now, John French is determined that if there is going to be another war in Europe, that cavalry will still be mounted and undertaking all of their roles from a mounted perspective. And Byng does not think that. He has on-the-ground experience, and he realises that if there is going to be another war in Europe, cavalry will have to take on a different role. They will need to be on foot. They will need to be fighting with rifles. And this is something that they are in direct conflict with in this sort of time period. We're looking at about 1905, 1906. So 10 years before the war starts nearly, there is already this conflict happening about where the cavalry is going to go. And he is foreseeing that. He is seeing that what we have been doing in the past is not going to work in the future. He spends a few years there. From 1910, he's placed in charge of the East Anglian Division. So he's given a divisional command. So he's gone, as you can see, he was the lieutenant colonel for the South African Light Horse Battalion commander. He's been brigade commander. He's now divisional commander, and that's all within 1 decade. That is. So he's moving places, and he spends 2 years with this division, and he's quite happy until in 1912, quite hilariously, in July 1912, he receives a telegram from Kitchener, who at this time is sort of the consul and working politically in Egypt. And he says, congratulations, marvellous to hear we'll be working together. And Byng's like, what on earth is he talking about? 10 days later, a letter arrives from the War Office saying, would you awfully mind taking up a job as the GOC of British troops in Egypt? I've had a look, I've looked into it. This comes from the War Office, but it doesn't say who this sort of appointment actually comes from, because that is quite a big jump. He's done 2 years as a divisional commander, he's done multiple years as a brigade commander, but he has been very quickly promoted up to GOC British troops in India, which is a massive jump, but obviously must be doing with the fact that people are aware of him and people are aware of his skills and what he can actually do. And what he does in Egypt is quite extraordinary. He's there to mainly protect the Suez Canal, obviously, for very obvious reasons, supplies through the Mediterranean, connections out to India and so on. So it's also as well to train the Egyptian army. They're also there to prevent interference from other countries. They're also there to deter insurrection as well. So this is a really important job that he has been given in 1912. They've only got a small number of soldiers, but as we know, Byng thrives with less than ideal conditions. He is rigorously training his soldiers. He has the highest expectations for them and their training. He never minces his words or is soft with anyone. He seems a gentle enough character, but if he needs something, he will say it. General Sir Ian Hamilton in 1914 is paying them a visit. And I'm just going to read you, I've put part of the quote there, but I'm just going to read this to you. He sends this letter to the King's private secretary in 1914 about Byng. I'm sending you a line containing news which I think the King will appreciate, that Julian Byng has more than fulfilled the promise of last year and is in every respect the most successful commander we have had in Cairo for many years. I cannot too highly praise his military work. I do not say he is a great administrator or a constructive original thinker, but short of that, he has all of the qualities: intense keenness, exceptional ability, great common sense, and unfailing physical energy. I think there's some fantastic descriptions there of Byng. He does have many fantastic abilities. He is very keen. I think he does have a bit of common sense as well. He's had to. And he does have passion. In the First World War, we've got to then move on to, this is what we're actually here to talk about, the First World War. He's in Egypt still. He is at the Suez Canal. That is his job, to protect it. That's obviously vital going forward. But he is tasked back to London in September 1914, where he is given Commander GOC 3rd Cavalry Division. So we are very firmly at sort of a divisional commander stage at this time. This is where he fits at this moment in time. The unit's not in great shape. They had previously been disbanded before the war, and now bringing them back together, they were missing loads of supplies, they're lacking in numbers of men, but they needed to be ready to move as fast as they could. And on the 2nd of October, the order is issued that they'll be going out to Belgium and to prepare themselves. They head off to Southampton in a motley collection of ships, make their way over the English Channel. Men and machines and supplies, they all get mixed up. It's all a bit in disarray by the time they get to Belgium on the 8th of October. But their first initial task is protecting 7th Division on their retreat down from Bruges down to Ypres. They've got to clear the road and make sure that it's safe for the division to move, which they do very quickly. And 7th Division are in Ypres by the 14th of October. It was common knowledge that Byng was abroad as well. He is a well-known figure, and obviously him being brought back from Egypt specifically to go out to the Western Front will have been of importance. And I've got this quote here that is written from actually H.G. Wells, who knows Byng quite well. And I think it sums it up. And I think if you keep this in mind for the rest of the talk, it suits quite well, I think. Here is a man who is nothing if not a soldier. My idea of him, knowing him intimately, has always been that he goes to bed at night and dreams of long vistas of soldiers, and he gets up in the morning and still thinks of soldiers. He knows Clausewitz by heart. He is a master of tactics. He has studied every battlefield in the world. He assisted Colonel Henderson in writing the life of Stonewall Jackson. He has the physique of a machine and the brains of 20 men, which fits him eminently to be a cavalry leader. 1 minute, please. So this division, they do see action in First Ypres. I don't think anyone in the British Army in Belgium at the time, they all will have seen some form of action, particularly for Byng in the division around Langemarck, Gelleveld, Zandvoort as well. They do see a lot of action in those first few weeks. And he's rewarded in March 1915. He is given the Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. Lots of very, very fancy words there. Give him some very fancy initials, that will as well. After that, he's given command generally, then he's promoted upwards. So again, he is going up again. He is going up as the GOC of the Cavalry Corps, and he spends 3 months in charge of the cavalry, sort of learning about what the role of the cavalry is going to be now, because we're into trench warfare at this point. Where is the cavalry going to go? But he's moved out of that role after 3 months. He is moved in to head up 9 corps, which are off to Gallipoli. He arrives in August and immediately starts planning. What does he start planning for? He starts planning for an eventual evacuation. From the end of August, when he arrives, he's sort of surveying the territory, what he can see. He is planning for an evacuation of the peninsula that will minimise casualties, minimise loss of equipment, and he is confident that this can be done without great loss. And he is correct in that as well, partially correct in that too. Because of that, again, he gets elevated to the Order of the Bath and Knight Commander as well. Again, more fancy letters for Julian. He spends a month back at the Suez Canal, obviously once the retreat has taken place, and then returns to the Western Front to leave 17 Corps. So sort of back now to the Western Front. We're not going to be going back to Egypt now, where he is actually, whilst in charge of this corps, facing Vimy Ridge. So he was already aware of Vimy Ridge from the beginning of 1916, and he writes about it during his brief spell that he was fascinated by the problems it presented. He was known, he spent many hours sort of studying the terrain and the land and seeing how it could be attacked if it needed to in the future, which did lead on to the main content, I think, Vimy Ridge and his appointment to the Canadian Corps. Now, this is an excellent picture. I think Byng here with his walking stick, I either feel like he's trying to nudge him out of the way, be like, you're in my way, just move, or he just wants to hit him. I just think it's really quite a funny picture. So this is obviously Byng with Arthur Currie as well. This is an unexpected appointment. And I think it's an unexpected appointment because actually Byng is disappointed by it. I believe, and I've had conversations about this and during my studying of this, that he is not anticipating another sideways move. So he went up from divisional commander to corps commander to 9, moved over to 17. I think that he's thinking that he is going to be the next in line for when an army commander position comes up. So he's going to be at 17 corps until an army commander position comes up. Not many of them, of course, but I think that's where he is thinking of going. And he's then moved sideways to the Canadian Corps, and he is disappointed. He does famously comment on, why am I sent to the Canadians? I don't even know a Canadian. Like I can hear it in my head, just his frustration. Nevertheless, he does accept this role. He obviously has to. He writes, I am ordered to these people and will do my best. but I don't know that there is any congratulations about it, which is funny because Haig had actually wired him a congratulations. He said, "The heartiest congratulations on your promotion, ... and good luck." Good luck is quite ominous in this point from Haig. The Canadian Corps is in a bad state. It's not a fighting unit at the time he's sent over there in early 1916. The 4 divisions are scattered. There's only really one division that's sort of in any sort of fit state to be able maybe to fight, and that is Arthur Curry's 1st Division. 4th Division aren't even in Europe yet. 2nd and 3rd, they need replacements. There's issues around command and their structure and how they're operating. This is going to be a big task for Byng. He has got to pull this corps in line, and maybe that's why he was given the role. This is something maybe we can discuss there. Was he given the role because of who he is? And has he been given this role because of his skills in order to bring the Canadian Corps up to speed? That's something maybe we can debate later. Now, he recognises that the bare bones are there. The bare structure is fine, but there needs to be some work done. So immediately, he basically threatens the Canadian government. He said, "You will give me complete control of the Corps to hire and fire as I please, or I'm leaving myself." And the Canadian Prime Minister knows they're in no position to let go of Byng. So he goes, "Okay, yeah, do what you want. You can sort everything out as you need to." And this ability to get rid of and replace people that he needed to, possibly is one of the most important things that he does. He brings in a lot of experienced British staff officers who have many, many years of experience, which is vital. You can't just have, fresh-faced, new, green officers by promoting from within. You need to have that sort of experience in order to assist everyone around you. So he brings in loads of British staff officers. He replaces 2 of the divisional commanders. I mean, he has to replace one of them, because one of them dies. But the second one he replaces because he's far more suited to an admin role. And then Richard Turner, he does flourish in an admin role. So he's good at seeing where people's skills lie as well. He replaces those two commanders. He replaces 6 of the brigade commanders. By 1917, he has replaced 7 staff officers in 12 infantry brigades, and Brits make up 21 out of 32 staff appointments in artillery, infantry, and the Corps HQ. But he does still have a corps and is very keen on having Canadian officers within that role. So Canadian divisional commanders, Canadians in staff roles at Corps HQ. He is very keen on having Canadians within this role. So he's making these changes at the higher level, but at the lower levels, battalion commanders, he is actually replacing battalion commanders as well, and he is promoting from within for the battalion commanders. But he is absolutely beloved by the men of the Canadian Corps. So much so that they adopt the moniker of Byng's Boys. And even after he leaves the Canadian Corps, they still call themselves Byng Boys, which I say says far more to Byng's influence on the Canadian Corps than Arthur Curry's was afterwards. But he's not soft. He imposes discipline. These Canadians needed kicking into shape, and he does that. There is a quote from one of these battalion commanders that he promoted, Alexander Ross, and he wrote about the changes that Byng made. "He revolutionized the whole thing. He gave me new ideas, things that appealed to my common sense. I always found he was rational, reasonable, and as a regular soldier, he was able to give us ideas which helped us. It improved my morale and my battalion's, I'm sure. I never found anyone as easy to get along with as I did him. He would come into your dugout in the front line, you would take out your maps, you would discuss things. His ideas were reasonable, he was interested, would make suggestions, and so on." So there is this continuation again. He's had that experience as a frontline battalion commander when he was in South Africa. I think he very much values the importance of speaking with his men, being with his men, knowing what they want to hear, whether they are his staff officers, or they're the ordinary ranks in the front line. He very much feels to me as someone who is open to discussion, is open to ideas. He is open to just talking to people and learning from them, which I think is really important. He, in the summer of 1916, gets thrown in at the deep end with the Canadians and the Mount Sorrel attack, which he learns a great deal from. He also learns a great deal from the Somme. Now, Lockie's not here to provide us with information about the Somme and training pamphlets and so on, so I will do my very best to fill in the gap. But Byng consistently wants soldiers to contribute to developments, to changes that are going to be made. There is still disparity between his divisions at the Somme throughout the end of 1916. There are some that do better than others, some that do worse, some that need extra help, but there are positive signs of the changes that he makes right from the ground level, from that battalion commander up level. He's not just about orders down, he's about suggestions up as well. Each unit was tasked, but at the end of the Somme, in the winter of 1916, each unit was tasked with giving a detailed analysis of their involvements on the Somme and what they thought could have been done differently, what they thought could have been done better, what did they think was missing, or what was just happening that was good. He was very much a big fan of the training pamphlets that came in the winter of 16 and 17, with new infantry tactics right to the front, right down to the front line, with new artillery tactics, the developments of barrages that we have, like rolling barrages and creeping barrages and so on, counter battery work as well. He is proving by doing all of this that he knows the job. He knows what it means and what it takes to be a corps commander. He's proving that in bucket loads. He also has frequent conferences where it's not just him and his staff officers. He invites the divisional commanders and sometimes the brigade commanders as well to discuss new tactics, to discuss where things have gone wrong or gone right. He would even have groups of battalion commanders invited to HQ to sit with him to study tactical problems, to study their admin, their training, their preparation, to make sure that they are all moving forward in the right way. And this is not one-off. This happens consistently and is one of his trademarks. He's actively present. He's present to all levels. Now, I'm not going to do like a blow-by-blow of, and at 5:30 on the 9th this happened, and at 5:36 on the 9th this happened. This isn't going to be a blow-by-blow of Vimy. It is about his leadership and what he does that leads up to that. There will be a little bit of contextual information, of course, but later on. So the announcement that there is going to be an attack and the Canadians are required at Vimy Ridge is given on the 19th of January. Byng is informed that he will be attacking in the area that you can see on the map here, quite handily color-coded. I'll just see if I can get the pointer up, laser pointer, yeah. So 1st Canadian Division, 2nd Canadian Division, 3rd Canadian Division, 4th Canadian Division, because obviously what it makes Vimy Ridge so important to the Canadians is that it's the first time all 4 of them fight together on the same day. Granted, here there is actually a British infantry brigade tied in with 2nd Canadian Division as well, the 13th Brigade, which also I'll mention it a bit, but ties in with his ability to be able to manage groups of people, with the fact that you do have British soldiers in with these Canadians, but I'll get onto that in a moment. So on the 19th, he's informed about this attack. On the 2nd of February, he has a conference with his staff officers and his divisional commanders where they start laying down the foundations for their plan, which they present to 1st Army HQ on the 5th of March and is returned to them with minor adjustments. So there aren't any major changes that needed to be happening. Army HQ have looked at it and gone, okay, change this bit here, change this bit there, but they are happy with the bones of what Byng and his staff officers and his divisional commanders have come up with. They are happy. To me, that speaks very much to Byng and what he's been doing with the Corps. He has created an environment where these orders or suggestions, whichever way they're going, up or down, are listened to, contributions are made, and actually what they end up with is, in essence, the plan that they use to attack on the 9th of April. They were to take the ridge. That was the plan, to consolidate the ridge. They'll be protecting the flanks up here, other units, so it's 24th British Division up the north, 51st Highland Division in the south. They're going to protect those two by taking sort of this particular bit of high ground. I'm sure a good chunk of us in the room, maybe some haven't, but I'm sure we know what Vimy is like. We know it, particularly if you've ever seen the monument. It's on that high ground, Hill 145. The view out over sort of this side of towards Vimy and then up towards like Lons and Loose in the distance and so on. It is an extraordinary piece of land, and the task is to take it and hold it, and that will be vital for the other divisions and corps on each side to protect their flanks. Everything is going to happen in an advance-wise. Everything is going to be thought out. It'll be patient. Everything will be deliberate. There's no rushing of any kind. This will be a steady attack, which will hopefully mean that the attack is successful, but will also lead to sort of diminished casualty rates, potentially, if it goes well. That is the intention, that the troops are well drilled on the plan and supplied well enough that they encounter as few problems as possible. They need enough artillery. Artillery is king of the battlefield in the First World War, as we know. And he is very, very keen on there being enough support. Interestingly enough, on the day in question, on the 9th of April itself, the Canadian Corps have more shells than the two corps to the south of them, to the south of the Scarp combined. So that just the Canadians on their own have more than the two corps next to them. So I say this with speech marks, they almost have an unlimited supplies of shells. They are extremely well prepared when it comes to the artillery. As we've said, the artillery spotter, like artillery spotters have been trained for for forward observations. They've been trained in the different types of barrages. The artillery is it's as strong as it can be, but every aspect is under scrutiny. Not just the artillery, your engineers, your supplies, your transport, staff officers are under scrutiny, making sure that they're being watched to make sure that they are efficient, but that they also work with each other and support where the strengths and weaknesses are, and don't just say, well, we're the British officers and you're the Canadian officers and you can do your bit and we'll do our bit. No, everyone is working together to get this plan rolling, to get it moving forward and for it be successful. Byng is obviously at the top. He does a lot of that himself, but he's not doing that on his own. He has his right-hand man, which is, I'm sure we'll play name bingo. I believe Jim had someone last week as well with pronouncing of the name. I have been practicing this one. Brigadier General Percy Pollexfen de Balquier Radcliffe, and I messed it up, and I haven't all day. But he's Byng's right-hand man in the division, in the Corps. I do have a picture of him. There we go. Dapper gentleman with his mustache. He is a very, very experienced soldier. He comes from an army family. He has trained as a staff officer before the war. He has experience in multiple aspects of administration at division and corps level. He is about the right person you want to be. And Byng has this thing about finding the right people for the right job as well. I'm not going to go massively into this, but one of his artillery, like sort of chief artillery officer, the SORA, is Alan Brooke of the Second World War. He can see that this is a young, bright soldier who, from an artillery perspective, does exceptionally well for the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And he is well respected, well liked as well. Some of his other staff officers, they may not have been the nicest of people, but he always had the best person that he could find for the job. Another one was the man in charge of logistics. We all know our dear friend Rob Thompson, the importance of logistics. Brigadier General George Farmer. He was absolutely phenomenal in making sure that every single soldier within the Corps had exactly what they needed. And again, this is an appointment through Byng. Ready for this attack, Farmer requisitions 24 million rounds of small arms ammunition, 450,000 Mills bombs, and 1,005,000 rounds of 18-pounder shells. On top of that, anything else that you could think of that a soldier or an advancing corps would need. He's got ammunition, obviously, engineering stores, road building equipment, animal fodder, general supplies, medical supplies. This corps is about as well supplied as it could be. And again, that's Byng bringing in the people that he thinks is right for that job. Alexander Ross, I'll just finish that quickly. The men on the ground, even though they'd been short of experienced officers in the years before the first part of the war and had been struggling before Byng came in, they are now very much seeing the practical element of the changes that he has made. And they feel confident. Again, Alexander Ross, he was commanding officer of the 28th Battalion, one of those that gets promoted. He remembers Vimy by this phrase: "We were good in every department, staff work and all the rest. Everything was good. And our relations with the staff, the Corps staff, were extremely good." They're in about the best position that they could have been. They are a completely, almost different Corps than they had been 15 months earlier, 12 months earlier, when Byng was given the job. Completely different group of soldiers. And that can't not have been Byng's influence. Would the Corps had acted the same way, got to the level that they did, if it hadn't been Byng? Maybe, again, another question that we could discuss afterwards. So the battle itself, just a map here. So you can see, again, using the pointer, 1st Canadian Division, 2nd Canadian Division, 3rd Canadian Division, 4th. As we said, we've got the 13th Infantry Brigade within 2nd Canadian Division, entirely British units in that brigade. And he has incorporated them within 2nd Canadian Division to offer support and assistance because they needed some additional replacements. And they are working well together at this point. There is a week-long bombardment up to the battle. And as I said, with these new tactics that are coming into play, using target spottings, the gunners were targeting positions, things that needed destroying. So target first, then destroy, rather than trying to just blanket destroy. The substantial amount of shells that they've got, plus a new fuse design on the shell, which means that they're more effective at exploding on impact rather than burying themselves in the ground, which we know does happen, makes destruction of particularly barbed wire and the German defences much easier. As you said, they're attacking together on this ridge for the first time. 5:30 in the morning on the 9th of April, 1917. It's bleak conditions. I believe it snows. It's been snowing, so there's snow on the ground. Very, very cold. But they're attacking together. There's more than 15,000 infantry in that sort of those first few waves of the attack. And the preparations that have been undertaken allow them to move forward, as you can see here. So the red line is where the Canadians are, and the blue line is where the Germans are. Yep. Allows them to take the ridge. Now, it does take a couple of days. The ridge isn't fully taken for about 4 days. If you sort of take actual clock hours. But on the 9th itself, the majority of the ridge, this orange bit here, has already been taken by the 9th. Hill 145, which comes under, well, I've lost it. It's about here. I've lost it. I'll have to look at that map again and point it out to you. But Hill 145, which is where the monument does end up, takes a couple of days. The initial sort of contact does happen on the afternoon of the 9th, but doesn't completely get taken until the 11th. Now, the casualties, there are still casualties over the course of the battle. So obviously, yes, that's 15,000 infantry in the first sort of waves, but obviously there are more coming forward, and you count your artillery and your engineers and so on in this. But the casualty numbers are just under 3,600 killed and 7,000 wounded. Obviously, success has come, but at a price. It's come at those numbers. But it has proved that a group, a corps, can be completely switched over into a very effective fighting force. Very quickly, cannot not put this photograph in. This is Byng around the time of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And I'm just going to read you a letter that he wrote to his wife on the 15th, because I think it's really funny about how it says he cannot contain his enthusiasm, really. But that face, to me, as we know, resting Byng face, that face does not scream enthusiasm to me. He writes, "The Canucks are saying very nice things to me, and one has informed me that they couldn't have done without the discipline and training which has been instilled into them for the last 8 months. That is most satisfactory, as it shows they are beginning to realise that bravery is not the only thing that is wanted, and that without discipline, it means loss of life without the compensating success." So he is there saying, this isn't just about being brave. This isn't just about being a good soldier. You need discipline. You need everything else that encompasses you being a good soldier to move forward. Because Vimy Ridge is not the end of the line for him, far from it. He has proved himself exceptionally well. He has been in control of 3 different corps now at this point. He has very successfully evacuated from Gallipoli. He has successfully taken the ridge and Vimy Ridge and turned the Canadian Corps completely around. But that doesn't mean the end of the line for him. As I just said earlier, I think he was disappointed in the Canadian Corps appointment because he wanted to go upwards, not sideways. And eventually he does. In June of 1917, he is rewarded for Vimy, and he succeeds Allenby as commander of 3rd Army. Now, this is potentially another discussion point as well. Byng, with his experience, gets promoted to 3rd Army, and Allenby is moved out to the Middle East, to Palestine. Now, considering that Byng has experience in the area, as we know, he was in Egypt for a while, he has knowledge of the area, would it potentially not have made sense to send Byng out to Palestine instead? There are issues around sort of Haig and Allenby and their sort of disdain for each other, and that may be why, because they were, bashing heads, that Allenby gets moved out, because they're not going to move Byng out for obvious reasons. But if maybe a position in Palestine had come up first, would Byng have gone there? Would he have been better suited than Allenby? Because, it's an interesting thought, one of these what ifs. But it's something that maybe we could consider. So he's moved up to 3rd Army, and is probably, I think he's going to be quite pleased with himself. Who doesn't love a promotion? Who doesn't love one of those? And he's moved up to 3rd Army, which are in, and again, speech marks, a quiet sector around Cambrai. This is where the Germans send a lot of their completely exhausted soldiers, because at this point, 1917, they've had the Battle of Arras, Battle of Messines. 3rd Ypres is just about to start as well. The German troops are exhausted. And they send them to Cambrai because it's a quiet sector and they can relax. I have seen references that the Germans used to call this the sanatorium of the West. Now, if you're thinking about trying to attack your enemy somewhere, the quiet area where they might not expect you sounds like a pretty decent idea, really. And Byng knew when he was given command of the Third Army that a plan was going to need to sort of be ready to be presented. Third Ypres is just about to start, which if Third Ypres had gone exceptionally well and had brought the end of the war, then they've got the plan and it didn't matter that it didn't happen. But if something should happen and this plan was needed, Byng knew that he needed one. So he came up with a plan, which, from its foundations, is made up of suggestions coming up, not orders going down. And this may be partly why, yes, we do have some success at Cambrai, but partly why it fails in the way it does as well. He hasn't gone, this is what we're doing. Well, he has, but it's come about from suggestions from other people, from his subordinates. Maybe if he'd have gone with the plan straight away of top to bottom, it might have been different. But he gets presented with two plans. One of them is Major General Henry Tudor of the 9th Division, who's advocating for a brand new series of infantry and artillery infantry tactics. We've then also got Fuller of the Tank Corps, who is looking for somewhere to use his tanks. They're getting all these tanks coming through, and he presents a plan for Cambrai. The ground and the terrain suits. So Byng goes, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. These, plus the fact that there's going to be a lack of reinforcements, really. So it needs to be something that will punch through. Because the reinforcements that might, I say might, I can't fully guarantee this, but those soldiers at the end of Third Ypres who get sent off to Italy maybe could have been reinforcements for this instead, but that Italy was a different situation and the politics in that as well. But that's a what if as well. So potential lack of reinforcements, so having to punch through quickly. The terrain making the plans suitable, plus Byng's openness to new ideas. So means that he'll take that and take that and take that and go, oh, here is a plan. Here you go. And he presents it to Haig, and they get approval for it in October of 1917. So obviously by October, full victory in Belgium is looking less and less likely. By the time you get to the beginning of October, you've got the Battle of Bruting, but then the rain sets in. It's looking like it's not going to be the breakthrough that was hoped. So somewhere else has got to happen. So this plan is authorised from October 17. Instead of there being a lengthy bombardment, there's a week-long bombardment at Vimy Ridge. If you go to other battlefields, Messines, they've got 2.5 weeks. The Somme, a week. Yes, it's good for destroying positions, but it's a massive indicator to your enemy that you're coming. So instead of having this lengthy and loud bombardment, it is hoped that the tanks would be used to smash through the wire, that they would absorb enemy fire, that they would be able to forge a path for the infantry. Again, like the Vimy Ridge, I'm not going massively into sort of a blow by blow of the attack. We had 2 excellent talks on this last year that when they go up on, if they're not already on the YouTube, which I think one of them might be, if they're not, you'll be able to watch those and learn about Cambrai in more detail. But the plan is that these tanks will be the front. They will smash through, they will lead the infantry. The Germans will be taken by surprise because there hasn't been an artillery bombardment, and they'll be completely overrun. Said plans given approval in the October by Haig, and the brigade commanders, the message gets passed fairly early on after this approval down to brigade level. However, it doesn't seem to get to the battalion commanders as quickly. Some of them don't find out about it for quite a while, which is nothing like what Byng has ever done before. We know this from particularly the Canadians, but from all of where he's been, he is very much about making sure that the man on the ground knows the plan. The man on the ground needs to know the plan. There was another quote, I didn't reference it, from another soldier who talks about Vimy, saying that he would say, he would visit the battalions on the ground and say, yes, this is the plan, but what if your battalion commander is gone? And gets then the platoon command, like the company commanders, to do the plan. Well, what about if they've gone? Platoon, all the way down, so that even like the corporals and the lance corporals know how the plan would work. This hasn't happened at Cambrai to the same extent. Is that a contributing factor to then what happens at Cambrai? Maybe it is. Now, there is some success on the first day, the 20th of November, 1917. So you can see this sort of farmost British advance. You can see, I mean, throughout the offensive, there is substantial push forward with this red dotted line. However, where the line actually settles is this dotted blue line here, which you can see, yes, we've taken Havrincourt, Flequier, Ribecourt, but you go south and actually British have lost territory as well. They've lost Gondelieu and territory to the south of the village. So this is not by any means a straightforward success. There have been some, but there have also been some disasters as well, some failures. That first day, there's over 450 tanks, thousands of troops, intense artillery on the day itself, the new tactics. We've got things like sound ranging being used, predicted artillery fire being used, close air support, infantry, tanks. We're starting to see what is sort of an all-arms warfare, almost. But it's hampered by things like the mechanical failures of the tanks. By day 2, over half of the tanks have either been lost or can't move because they've broken down. And German artillery, the Germans have woken up and they're ready to play now as well. So their artillery have got going. Infantry moving forward as quickly as it did exposed the weakness of using tanks as well, which are slow moving at this point in time. So it's a mixed bag, Cambrai. It's a mixed bag. I think I would describe it. Casualties, around 45,000 is the number that I can find. There seems to be a bit of fluctuation, somewhere around 10 to 12,000 deaths during this sort of 2.5 week period as well. So it's certainly not it's not the crowning glory. I'm thinking that Byng, this is his sort of first chance as an army commander to show what he can do, and it hasn't gone necessarily that well. I can imagine that would have been frustrating for him. I forgot I'd put that picture in. I meant to take that picture out. That battle, Cambrai, had been described by Robert Neelands, who is a historian, as the great might have been of the First World War. If it had gone to plan, could it have been the crowning moment? Again, it's a what if. We don't know if that would have happened, but it could have happened, potentially. We then move into 1918, and obviously what is happening is the Spring Offensive in March 1918. This is the sort of, I would describe it, and people please feel free to disagree with me, but I would sort of describe the Spring Offensive as the Germans' last roll of the dice. They are on their knees at home. The supplies are starting to run out for soldiers. Yes, they've had a load of troops come over from the Eastern Front, but the Americans are on their way, which is additional numbers. There's blockading going on by the Royal Navy. It's their chance to go. Which, as we can see from this map, it does focus on the New Zealanders, which is why there's a map there. But I thought it was a very clear map to show that, look at some of these gains that are made in the Spring Offensive. Yes, the line doesn't break, but there are substantial gains made. And as you can see here, Third Army are just sat here sort of between Arras and Albert, the Somme. That line nearly does break, but it doesn't. It doesn't break. Now, Third Army are used in what becomes the August Offensive, the last 100 days. And I know that's, if you count the French, the last 100 days doesn't work. I know, but for simplicity's sake, let's just say last 100 days. The tide is turning. The Third Army are used at the Second Battle of the Somme. which is around the Ancre, as you can see here on the map. The Second Battle of Arras. They used at the battles of the Hindenburg Line and the final advance in Picardy. They are consistently used in the last 3 months of the war. But if you look, and there's particularly certain sources that if you look at anything to do with the Third Army, will suggest that they don't have these sort of like showstopper moments. Like they don't take this and they don't take that. They sort of have one thing where it's the New Zealanders taking Le Quesnoy, but they're used around other places. It's a period of time where there's obviously lots of movement, lots of fluctuation. But what is happening in Third Army at the time is that, you have to assume a few things about the Germans at this point, when you're looking at the Third Army and Byng and what he's doing with the army. Because yes, Cambrai didn't go as accordingly to plan, but he is still instituting training. He is still instituting that ideas coming up from the bottom is good. He is still walking about with his men. He's not changed his leadership style just because Cambrai didn't go particularly to plan. He's not changed that, and certainly the spring offensives don't change that either. There is also, then you have to think of, well, are the Germans are weakened at this point? Is that why when they're used in these engagements, we're able to push back, and so on? Victory at this point, it's not one single thing, it's a multitude of things together. And although, the learning that we've talked about, it is uneven. There are parts of all of the army groups, First Army, Second, Third, even then down into corps and division levels. Some are doing things better than others. Some divisions, some brigades are doing things better than others. But the adaptations to modern warfare have been learned and are used in 1918 to their most successfully, I would say. The British simply can apply the techniques of modern war a little bit better, and plus the fact that the Germans are really on their knees at this point. They have used up every reserve that they can. As it's their lines learned by Byng throughout the war and the wider British Army vital in these final engagements. And I just want to put his order of the day up on there, that he sends to all ranks of the Third Army. And I won't necessarily read it out to you. I'm sure you can probably read it faster than I could read it out. But there are certain lines in there. Your share in the consummation of this achievement is one that fills me with pride and admiration. To all ranks, to all corps and formations, to all administrative and transport units, I tender my thanks. He thanks everyone, all ranks, all corps, formation, administrative. He is thanking everyone. He's not just saying, well done you at the front for doing the fighting. He thanks everyone. And I think that really sort of sums up Byng as a leader and as a man as well. Very, 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 very quickly, end of the war, he retires from the army. After he's he gets various other fancy letters after his name. He gets the Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath in the 1919 New Year's honours. He was in his own right elevated to the peerage as Baron Byng of Vimy. He was offered a position in Southern Command, but he turned it down. He thought it would be more appropriate for a younger, junior, more fresher officer to take the role. Retires from the army before being appointed Governor General of Canada in 1921. He seemed like a good choice. The Prime Minister at the time, Arthur Meighen, had preferred someone maybe a little bit more politically qualified, someone maybe more of a civilian background, but there was basically no one else who would do it, and Byng was available and wanted to do it. So he went over to Canada, and he was beloved. The people of Canada loved him. He travelled extensively. He got involved with the cultures, as you can see in this very interesting, I love this photograph here. Mrs. Byng and Julian being taught how to ski. In 1923, they are embracing life in Canada. He developed a love of hockey as well. He was a particular fan of a team from Ontario. I cannot remember the name. He loved visiting the Royal Agricultural Winter Fair. He got involved in life and people loved him, and he was a recognisable face. They knew who Baron Byng of Vimy was. They knew him. And I have no doubt that, he would go up and talk to people all the time. I have no doubt that there would be some ex-soldiers who would meet him in the streets and say what he meant to them and that they'd served, or mothers and family members. Oh, my son was killed or was in the Canadian Corps. He was one of the Byng boys. As I said, they kept that title until the end of the war. Forget about Curry. They kept that title. They were very, very proud of being Byng's boys. And he was enthusiastic about the job. He was so happy to be there. He does get himself sort of tied up a bit politically when he sort of steps in as the king and the government's representative, when there is a bit of a disagreement between the Prime Minister at the time, William Mackenzie King, wants to dissolve Parliament, and Byng, rather than just doing the sort of usual, yes, of course, do what you need to do, he goes, actually, no. So an election gets called and King retains his seat, but other very senior politicians lose their seats. It's all a bit of a mess. And why, when, maybe Byng should have got involved, maybe he shouldn't. It's a bit of a depends on who you ask kind of situation. He returns to the UK in 1926. At this point, he's 63 at this point. He's earned his retirement, but he doesn't retire just yet. He's appointed Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Now, we understand what that job is now, but he makes some really big changes as well. He just loves to make things better. He does things like improves discipline. He introduces meritocracy for promotion. So, if you're good at your job, not who you know. He retires ineffectual senior officers. He makes changes to policemen's beats because criminals had realised the police officers were doing the same beats, so they adapted their behaviour. So Byng adapted the police officers' behaviour. Police boxes, police cars, a central control room. He really modernised the Metropolitan Force and maybe brought it more from a potentially like Victorian Edwardian force into the modern day, as we would a police force we more recognise now, I would say. He also gets promoted, an honorary promotion, to Field Marshal as well in 1932, and he does die in 1935 suddenly of an abdominal blockage, and is buried at St Leonard's in Beaumont-cum-Meuse in Essex. And I just want to finish up very, very quickly. I'm going to do my tying up because I think I probably have gone over time. I am sorry if I have gone over time. But there was so much to say. There was so much I had to say on this. Byng has all of the levels of command here. He does battalion, brigade, division, corps, and army. He is experienced at every level of command in the First World War and prior to that as well. But I think what he is best known for, and probably his crowning glory, is the work that he did with the Canadian Corps. He proved throughout his time there that the lessons he had learned as a junior officer, as a mid-level officer, commanding officer, as a senior officer, as a young man who is a youngest child who has ill-fitting boots, that you can do that you can make the best of a bad situation. You can do it. And he really proves that, I think, with what he does with the Canadian Corps and making it what it is. Alexander Ross, again, he had some great quotes. I could have had one for every point about Vimy. He said about the Corps, we were up to strength. We had trained hard all winter whenever we could. We had adequate artillery. We had adequate preparation. We had adequate reconnaissance. And we knew what we were going to do, and we did it. General Curry was very fortunate in taking over the Corps after General Byng. And even Curry's own biographer, who is quite the Curry fan, I must say, writes this about Byng. It was Byng who moulded the Corps into a cohesive unit. He had made the Canadians realise what they were capable of achieving and had given them the self-confidence to do it. Because of Byng's efforts, Curry inherited a formidable fighting formation. And I think those words really sort of sum up Byng and how he was as a commander. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Beth. That was brilliant. Really, really good. And you didn't go over time at all. It was plenty to say. And thoroughly fascinating. Thanks for all the research you've done on that.
Thank you.
Imagine you found it quite interesting, really going into so much depth.
Do you know what? I've been completely enamoured by Byng now. I am completely enamoured by him, and I'm certainly looking forward to getting to know him even better and to find out some more stuff about him. But yeah, it was been excellent. Yeah. So, are there any questions or discussions that we would like?
So there are a few comments that cropped up in the chat. I don't know if there are any kind of specific questions. Jan had a couple of points sort of about
I preempted you all by answering what I knew would be questions in the talk.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I know some kind of parallels with the German offensives in 1918 and at the end of the Second World War as well. Yeah. Louise is in there. Good old Louise. Far away.
No, it's not a question, it's an offer, because I'm going to the Hague Archives a lot. If I find anything, I'll add Byng on my list of names that I need to look through. If I find any interesting papers, I'll send them on. I've got a list. Obviously, I'm everybody's archive elf at the moment, so I've got a list so I'll add that to my list.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
So, in fact, I kind of had a question. Just came to me towards the end when you were summing up, Beth, and you talked about, obviously he was very innovative in what he did, and making the best of what he was given is kind of very thorough. Is there evidence, or have you seen any evidence that his kind of peers were directly influenced by his approach with modern warfare? I mean, did they kind of go to him for advice? Was there the opportunity for them to kind of learn directly from him?
Do you mean sort of other corps commanders or within?
Yeah, kind of other corps command. Yeah, because I mean, obviously, the success at Vimy must have.
Yeah,
I can imagine widely admired. Did they kind of go to him and say, Julian, tell us, what's the secret of your success?
I can't say that I've seen anything explicitly written to suggest that. I mean, I have. My research for this has very much been focused on Byng and Byng's perspective. I imagine there would have been conferences of description where the corps commanders have met with their respective army commanders and best practices have been exchanged. I haven't found anything explicitly stating that, though. There may well be. That may be another avenue of research. I think people will have picked up other things from him, because what I did see in the research was that generally throughout his life, Byng is a very well liked character by anyone. I think there's one instance, Gough is a little bit jealous of him at points, and makes comments about him and his skills. But generally, people seem to be of the idea that Byng knows what he's doing. So, to me, that would suggest, at least, that if they're not explicitly being told by him or by an army commander, they're at least sort of picking things up as they go along.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting, and presumably that there's correspondence in the archives between the different generals and showing what they discuss.
Yeah.
Great. Giles has got a question. Giles, do you want to ask that directly?
Sorry, I was unplugged. Did the Canadian Corps have its own supply system, and or did it use the British supply services? And just out of curiosity, did the Canadians eat British rations, or did they eat Canadian food?
Unfortunately, Giles, this is not my wheelhouse. I don't know the answer to this one. I am not well versed on logistics. I know the basics. I know how they use they use the trains, and I know they use but knowing actually about if they're using British or Canadian supplies and supply chains, I'm not certain. Jim might know the answer, but or someone else in this room who knows logistics might know the answer, but I do not, unfortunately.
If anyone
The whole
knows,
logistics chain was basically British led. So that basically has, and they will have been eating British rations. So they'll have had the same on. But do remember, half the Canadians were actually British, so it won't have mattered that much. If not more than half the Canadians were actually British. Born, I mean.
I think I'd agree with that. I think also the Army Service Corps supplied was responsible for the artillery ammunition supply to the CRA, which also had a large contingent of Royal Artillery as well.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to ask your other question as well that you've put in the chat?
I'm just trying to pick up what you said earlier about Alan Brooke. Was it actually Byng who was responsible for selecting Alan Brooke? I seem to recall that the General Officer Commanding Royal Artillery, the Canadian General Officer Commanding Royal Artillery within the Corps, wasn't actually a gunner.
Yeah.
And as such, 100% relied on Brooke to do that. And the other thing was, I think he went on to command in the Second World War, Andy McNaughton, but he was the Canadian counter-battery staff officer as well. And the CBSO seemed to be a massive success at Vimy. Was that down to Byng too?
Yes, to what I've read, yes, he is certainly very vital to both Alan Brooke, and I think it's McNaughton. Yeah,
I think it was Andy McNaughton.
The two of them, Brooke and McNaughton, work in partnership, and their plan is extremely successful. But yes, my understanding is that Byng was certainly, even if he didn't sort of make the final decision, if he was maybe told to by someone else, he certainly had a say in who was coming into his corps, who he wanted.
Thanks. I knew that Brooke was an up-and-coming star from something that Pete Simpkins wrote about artillery staff officers visiting the French at the beginning of 17. Thanks.
Yeah, it was just to add something to that one, which has not been part of what Beth's had a bit research. Alan Brooke basically was very much in charge of artillery at 18th Div on the Somme. So the rolling barrage that 18th Div used on the Somme was basically Alan Brooke, and Byng basically bought him in. It was a sort of like transfer in. If you can think of the top Premier League guys bringing in their top people, he did. And Alan Brooke went on to become GSO1 after Vimy, became GSO1 of First Army. So that just showed how that really moved him on.
Thanks, Jim.
So just to add a little bit on there for people in the area that I know about, the bit I know.
Thanks, Jim. We got a good question here from Corey.
Yeah, I was just curious, like when he took over command of Third Army and came in, and did an assessment, did he feel like he was taking over, a well-oiled machine, or did he, come in and say, I've got to, reorganize this whole mess, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, and a great question. I believe so. From what I've done, it's not glaringly like the Canadians where he came in and he was like, I've got to change everything and I've got to basically start from again. I think it is Alan B is a competent army commander. I think it's well oiled enough that he can step into the role itself. I don't think from my understanding, I don't think he needed to make many significant changes. I mean, I'm sure he will have made changes to for things to suit him, but I don't recognize there being major changes.
Yeah, it wasn't a complete rehabilitation or anything like that.
No. I think by this point as well, I think by the time you get to 1918, I think generally, I know he comes in 1917, but we are in those later stages of the war. Things are now, they're certainly in a far better state than they had been in like 14 or 15. Changes have been made to the structure generally.
Thanks for the question.
Very good. Thank you.
Beth, do you know whether any of his older brothers who had kind of started out with their military careers, did did any of them go on to kind of more senior command during the First World War?
I don't think so, because when the war started, well, I know he was, maths has gone off, but there was a point, I think he was about 52, 53, when in the early years of the war. And actually, I looked at that in 1913, he had actually been considering retirement himself in 1913.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I think any sort of older brothers would have probably been, if they had got that far. I don't think any of them did quite as well as Julian. But even if they had, they wouldn't have been in place, because, well, like his oldest brother is something like 23 years older than him from his father's first marriage. So, you know, there's big age gaps. So I think he's very much the only Byng.
Yeah. Okay. And did he have children himself? Any sons who served?
So I did just like mention it briefly in the thing, but they're basically, Evelyn and Byng had many miscarriages whilst they were living in India after they got married, and the treatment that Evelyn was subjected to because of the miscarriages basically made her infertile.
Right.
So they could not have children, which was a great sadness to them both. And I didn't want to throw this in because, like, I didn't want to detract from, you know, I didn't want to go necessarily down, feelings. I'm good at feelings, but I didn't want to go down that route. There's always a part of me that thinks this sort of fatherly connection he has, particularly with his men, his soldiers, the other ranks, the men in the front line. I almost wonder if it's a bit of a, particularly by the time we get to like Vimy or Cambrai or 1918, where those young men, some of them may not have been much older than any potential sons he may have had would have been. Maybe there's sort of like a longing there, and so he's taking on that father figure. I don't know. That's a feelings thing, and I'm about facts today.
No, it's interesting though, and I mean, I did note that. I mean, he was relatively old when they got married as well, wasn't he? I think so. He said he was married at 1902, so he'd have been 40 by then, which I guess, you know, for those times, you know, was relatively old, and I guess that probably didn't help with the sort of fertility situation either. Yeah. Great. Okay. Any other final questions for Beth before we wrap up, or any comments, observations? I think everyone's just stunned by the quality. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Is Byng related to the admiral who was shot on the quarterdeck?
Yes.
I thought so. Okay, thanks.
Like great grandfather. Many greats.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
With the German counterattack at Cambrai, which was using the new stormtrooper tactics a lot, when it came across to 1918 and sort of Operation Michael, was any lessons learnt from that counterattack by Byng and his staff on how to deal with the stormtrooper tactics?
I will have to go into my extensive notes because there were two sets of notes. There was a long set and a short set. I do have in my long set somewhere, I think, referencing about stormtroops, and I do mention it somewhere. Oh, hang on. I will find it. I've got about 15 pages here. I will find out and I will get back to you.
Sure. Well, he seemed to do better than Goff did.
I think so.
In dealing with it. So I just wonder if they did something different, or they.
I imagine he probably has. I'm sure I've read somewhere that he had picked up on that, but I will need to go through the notes and find the answer for you. I know there is an answer in here somewhere.
Makes sense.
You'll be hearing about that, Alan, I'm sure.
I'll send you an email.
Okay, cheers.
All right. No, thanks for the question. So Beth, just kind of in closing, you very helpfully provided a list of some good books that people can reference. I mean, any among those in particular that you'd recommend in particular for people who want to learn more?
If you want sort of who is Byng, the biography Byng of Vimy is always a good place to start. I really enjoyed the Vimy Ridge and Assessment book. I got it. You can get them. I got all of these on ebook. You can even, if you don't want to buy them, you can rent them from Google Books. So you can have it for 90 days as well. And that is an option if you didn't want to spend the money for the long term. So I got these as ebooks. Vimy Ridge and Assessment. I really enjoyed the sort of the battley bits of the book they gave a good cover. But everything that was written about Byng was excellent, and even the stuff where they refer to the monument and the Second World War as well. That I found that a really, really interesting piece of literature.
Yeah, excellent. So
I suppose I have to say that Jim's book is good as well.
on the essential list, definitely.
Yeah.
And part 2 following very soon, I believe, Jim.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's with the publishers.
Excellent.
It could be any time in the next 5 years. I'm hoping it's there for May.
All that blood, sweat, and tears.
Because the second guide is the northern bit, which is where we all are in May. Those who are there, so I'm hoping it's there to sort of. I can set up a stall on Notre Dame de Lorette, like a table.
That's a good idea.
Sell the book while I'm there.
Well, just make sure they're all signed as well.
Do a Peter Hart and shout at everybody to come over here. There's only one left for the box and the table.
Excellent. Well, that's great. So that neatly brings us to an end. So thanks once again, Beth, for a fantastic talk. Obviously, it is being recorded, so if anyone wants to watch it again, that'll be available very soon. I think Bart had to drop off in preparation for Super Bowl excitement, but Bart will be sorting out the video, and then we'll send the link round to all of you. So yeah, thanks from all of us, Beth. That was really great. Thank you all for attending.